Hey, so we've been watching your progress here over the last few weeks, and we know what your plan was going into the offseason. You explained it to us in detail. Having said that, you've lost a lot of players and haven't signed anybody. Was that always the plan going into this to see how you came out of the draft and what you got there, and then figure out how to address the roster, or is this just sort of something that happened?
Yeah, it was somewhat a plan, probably 90%. I think I mentioned at the owners meeting that realistically, this offseason was very similar into how we've approached the majority of our off seasons. Is we've lost a lot of unrestricted free agents. We didn't re-sign a lot of unrestricted free agents or sign other teams. We played the comp formula a good bit over the last few years, so we've always had that in mind. But technically, too, if there would have been a player at the right price, things like that, we would always strike and try to take advantage of the opportunity.
And then maybe Sean can speak to this too. How is Aaron Donald on board with all this kind of stuff? Because we look at the roster, and it's going to be a young roster. You know, it's obviously a reloading, not a rebuild, but it's going to be a season that's going to be a challenge that maybe he hasn't had for a few years. Where is he on this? Since we don't get to talk to him really.
He's a great competitor, Greg. I think there's narratives written every single year, but you still have to go play those games. And so there's a lot of time for us to develop and see what this team becomes. Challenge is right now because there's a lot of new faces, but there's inevitably going to be some guys that we're talking about a year from now that have become really big time players for us that probably, come out of nowhere, but you're starting to see that work right now. But Aaron's motivated. The greats elevate people around them. It's a very similar feeling in terms of that outside in narrative when we first got here. So we're just going to take it a day at a time, see if we can maximize every guy in this building. And I know those core guys that we've talked about are up for the challenge of not having to do anything other than be their best self, and that naturally elevates people around them. And there's going to be some guys that don't really surprise us, but I think surprise a lot of people externally, whether that's guys we draft this weekend, whether that's guys that are already in the building. And do think last year a lot of guys got some snaps that they can really be able to draw on and move forward. And let's go see what the heck happens.
Thanks, guys.
Stu?
Sean, you mentioned in Phoenix that and confirmed that you guys had been exploring the possibility of trading Allen Robinson, which obviously came to fruition recently. How did you guys arrive at that versus, like you had mentioned, if he was going to be sticking around, fully investing in him and reaching his highest potential in whatever role he may have?
Yeah, I think it was approaching it just like you mentioned. Les had good dialogue with Omar Khan throughout the process. Allen was very in tune with that as a possibility. But if for whatever reason it didn't go down that way, we were going to continue to pour into him, try to do a better job of utilizing him in a fashion that was in alignment with his skill sets that I think you always try to do as you move forward and you try to be able to learn from previous things. And that was going to be our focus and concentration as a coaching staff. And really up until last week, that was the mindset and mentality that we had taken where in my mind, I thought we had kind of moved on where, hey, we're moving forward with Allen. And then the Pittsburgh thing kind of came together pretty quickly and he was a pro about it. And I wish Allen nothing but the best.
And then Les, or I guess Sean, for both of you guys, is how comfortable are you with 11 picks? And historically, you trade back to try to get more, but especially given that gap between the third and the fifth round, how comfortable are you with the current allotment? Right?
Go ahead, Les.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people on our staff would love for us to, at some point, move back to cover some of that gap and get in between maybe our 77th pick and whatever the first pick in the fifth round is. But that's still to be determined. That's definitely always an option. It's always a beneficial option based on accumulating more picks, maybe filling that gap. But you can always trade up too from the fifth round into those gaps. So there's many ways to accomplish that. And at the end of the day, it'll be, hey, when we get on the clock, is there a trade partner? Is there not? Is there a player in that moment that we really feel good about and we want to make around?
Jordan?
Hi, guys. This question is for both of you, if you don't mind. So you guys haven't been shy in the past about making trades for players at premium positions. I'm talking about the defense, in this case, pass rusher and cornerback. In this draft class, within the initial current 100 or so pick points that you have right now, do you see opportunities to add players at premium positions, or is there another assessment you have of the depth of this class on that side of the ball?
Go ahead, Les.
It's you're exactly right. I think I did mention earlier at a few positions that we're interested in. I'm like, oh, we're heavy at those positions, or we have more numbers than normal, and you're always at that point really trying to scrutinize where we biased because we might be looking for those positions, or did that just is that just the year that we're in, 2023 draft, and that position happens to be thicker than others. But what I can say, Jordan, is usually a lot of the grades, the initial evals are done during the fall, even during let's call it the spring and summer of last year, before we even kicked off a game this past season, and before, let's call it, our needs were, let's call it, more, or they were less clear back then. So we're ready to go. We'll see how it plays out.
To reference JW Jordan, my man, nothing to add.
And then how do you guys go about assessing what you might allocate in the draft towards your offensive line, in consideration of the sort of, there's a backlog of depth. It seems like that you guys need to see how these guys are on the field. How do you balance whether to beef up that area in the draft versus, getting a clearer assessment of guys who maybe hadn't been able to play because of injuries?
I think really what it boils down to is there's a lot of different things that we feel like, positions particularly, that are going to upgrade our football team, Jordan. So I think it's kind of having the agility throughout the course of the draft and being able to adapt and adjust accordingly. Because of some of those things, that enables that flexibility, because of some of the picks that Stu alluded to. So obviously that's an important thing, but I do think there are some guys, like you mentioned, that you'd love to be able to see them get more of an opportunity to be evaluated based on how small their resumes are, based on opportunities. You think about a Tremaine Ankrum, you think about a Logan Bruss, guys like that. And then there's a handful of guys that have accumulated experience that, if they stay healthy, very similar to our 2019 going into 2020, you get better because you have conscientious guys. And so being able to have a give and take, but there's a lot of different things that we'll look to do to upgrade our football team, and then a lot of positions that will be addressed in that regard.
And then last one for me, if you don't mind. Question for both of you, but maybe in a little bit of a different way for each of you. You guys are maybe on the precipice of signing a historic undrafted free agent class in terms of its size. And so, Les, question for you, wondering what that process is like with your pro personnel department, and then Sean, what that's like with your assistant coaches who are so involved in that process.
If I start, Jordan, I think I've tried to caution everyone in the building to approach the process the same, in that just because we have more numbers to sign doesn't mean there's automatically going to be, let's call it, more better players right after the draft. So stick to doing what we've done, sign players that we think can add competition to our roster. And at that point in time, Jordan, there's many ways. Right after the draft, other teams will maybe cut players when they sign or fill up their roster with new players. That's an avenue to have open to continue filling slots. You got XFL, you have USFL, you have some of those leagues, and then that process goes on into the summer. So, yes, you're exactly right. We got a lot of numbers to fill. Doesn't mean we have to get all those numbers filled on Saturday night. So if we approach it patiently and with intent, then by the time we get to training camp, we'll probably have done our job.
Yeah, very, very similar, Jordan. I think our coaches, Les and his group, and James Gladstone's done an outstanding job of being able to work in coordination with our coaches to do the backgrounds, to be able to make sure that we're identifying guys that, that we like. You don't want to just, I think a lot like what Les just said, just because you can carry 90 doesn't mean that you have to carry 90. You want to make sure that you're adding players that you feel like have a legitimate chance to make your football team, to upgrade the level of competition. And in a lot of instances, the way that we've kind of learned how to be able to appropriately practice and, we'll be able to practice a little bit more and do some things this offseason that are in alignment with getting the appropriate evaluations. And then that enables you, if you feel like you need to add some numbers going into training camp or things like that, you can do that. But you want to make sure that there's a light for every single player that we onboard and you have a vision for those guys, even though there are more spots like you talked about.
Thanks, guys.
Sarah.
Hi guys, Sean, this question is for you. This was a bit a longer off season than you had last year. What does that allow you to do during OTAs as you maybe add plays or just work toward putting together what you want to do with the offense this year?
Just have more time to be able to really develop foundations. I think when you look back on just 6 years, Sarah, you appreciate when you say every single year is a new year. You really understand how important and how vital that is to reset the foundations, to make sure that there's a specific and sequential onboarding process, not only for our players, but for our coaches, a reevaluation of everything that we do that's in alignment with trying to take steps forward. Last year we didn't even have an off-season program. We had so many different reasons, none of which are anything other than really an excuse, but we'll actually get a chance to have an off-season program to be able to kind of develop some foundational things, both culturally, schematically, physically, so all three of those things I think will be key and critical. And then we'll look forward to in a few weeks being able to get this rookie class in here. But the guys that have been here have been outstanding. I've loved the energy in our building. I've loved the way they've gone about their business with the meetings and with the lifts. I think the coaches have done a great job of making sure that every minute is accounted for. And, it's a good feeling in the building. It's been great to have these guys back in here, but it is important, Sarah. And that's really the difference is we're really having an opportunity to attack it. What I would think is the right way that is about setting the right foundations and giving you the best chance for everybody to reach their highest potentials and be able to have something that they can kind of lean back on as we continue to build.
I asked Matthew about that last week and he kind of said, you know what, forget being creative or all that stuff. I'm just happy to be here and be able to throw the ball. Do you notice a difference in him this year versus what he was going through last year?
You know what? I think there's a lot of different things that were going on, that were all, awesome things that came as a result of what we were able to do. But however you cut it, it does take away from the task at hand and being able to be present. I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for Matthew, but Matthew's been so consistent and steady always, but the ability to participate, it's been a while since he's been able to have an off season that he's feeling good. He's able to do the things that he's doing right now. And that elevates people around him, similar to what Greg was asking about with Aaron. Just having Matthew out there, being able to partake in these activities, naturally just being himself, it's going to elevate and bring others with them. And that's a big deal to be able to have your leader do that. And, I know he's feeling really good and he's looking good.
And then one more for me. I was listening back to your interview in Phoenix, and a couple times you talked about not taking things for granted. What were those things that you maybe were taking for granted in the past that you're not anymore?
I think the appropriate thing is really just being reminded of your purpose. It's easy to say it, but then when you have some tangible evidence that you can draw on and say, man, that's not the person or the coach that you want to be for the players, for the coaches, just with the vibe and the energy that you bring on a daily basis, that's really more what it's about. Being able to seamlessly handle things the right way and focus your energy on the things that you can control. And I know I've said it before, which is why you don't want it to be like a broken record, but being able to apply it and have some situations and some circumstances where you're saying, man, I know I can be better for people that I really want to be better for. Those are the kind of things. And how consistently are you focused on that? How seamlessly are you able to not just be so results oriented, but really commit to the process and have the enjoyment for the things that you love by working with the players and the coaches and continuing to find ways to help them reach their highest potential and, do the things that we talk about, but then being able to apply it. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to do it. And that's really kind of what I was probably, alluding to more than anything else there, Sarah.
Thanks, Sean.
You're welcome.
Gary.
Oh, mute Gary Klein.
Got to get off mute, Gary.
Here, that must have been a hell of a question right there. You were going.
Well, I was thanking you guys for doing this. But before we begin, I just wanted to get your evaluation of yours and each other's performances in the draft video. You guys seem to have expanded roles this year.
You know, they took out a lot of my best work in that. So I'd say it was, I gave it, it was subpar to say the least from my vantage point. I got a lot more in me.
Anytime I watched for the first time this morning, and my immediate reaction was, wow, I wish I'd have prepared more or was better at acting or had another shot, a do-over, another rep, another practice, something. But I can't say that I didn't come away going, ooh, I got a career. I got a next chapter in Hollywood, per se.
You guys are going into, you're in your offseason program with only Matthew on the roster at quarterback. And, you guys have not re-signed Wolford or Bryce. How would you evaluate kind of the second tier maybe of the quarterback class in this draft? And that's for both of you.
Go ahead, Les.
Yeah, we've definitely, because of the situation I had of the void, we've definitely been intentional about, if you want to call it the second tier, right? And those players that would probably be beyond the 4, even a 5th one now, in Tennessee, this, talked about a lot, going early, going before us, things like that. But no different than, every year it's quarterbacks are, wow, it's a very interesting, right, eval, because there's this element of tier that you're thinking, okay, it's going to change the world, it's going to be the franchise, and wow, the pressure those young men have, and you just want them to get in the right situation and be able to evolve, naturally progress, because it's a tough job, a great job. We'd all like to have it. And then there's that next tier that you just never know, for whatever reason, you don't have them in tier 1, but they have just enough of some tier 1 type variables that you go, wow, they might be a tier 2. They might have a chance to be a backup. They might have a chance. I think the thing we would say, if I kept it simple, is if that player had a chance to play, could Sean, his staff, could our team as a collection actually win, be competitive while the starter is missing time for whatever reason? And definitely hard to predict, because what's very interesting is every quarterback in this draft was very, very good at his respective school, probably dominated college football at some level.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think you're in tune with it, Gary, just because of our situation, but kind of like we were talking about earlier, whether you end up, if you draft or if you don't, then being ready to address, the other opportunities to make sure that, you've got a guy that you think you can win with, and what does it look like to be able to add those guys? But there's so many different situations and so many different positions that, we've had to be a little bit more intentional. Les and his group do a great job, but from a coaching perspective, there's more needs, more things to address, more, just voids in the roster in general, just based on the amount of guys that we have in terms of just the sheer numbers. So that's enabled us to have a broader perspective on the draft, where in previous years we could be a little bit more specific in some of the focus in areas of concentration. So it's different. So I think we're a little bit more in tune with the big picture. At least I can speak, that way from my vantage point, where Les and his group are in tune with everybody every year.
Even to answer your question, Gary, going back to Jordan, to keep it simple, if you have a need and you just force a draft pick to fill a need, but that pick doesn't fill the need, at the end of the day, all that work, you still have a need, even though you filled a roster spot. So that's the tricky thing. And probably quarterback's a little bit trickier, just because that is that's a tougher position to predict success in, especially from college to the NFL.
And Sean, you specifically, what would you be looking for if you guys were going to draft a young quarterback as a backup, maybe an eventual successor to Matthew? What qualities are you looking for specifically?
Yeah, I think, you're always talking about decision making, the ability to be able to play on time with accuracy. What does it look like in crunch time? What are those innate traits that you have in terms of how your personality can authentically come across, but you naturally bring people with you, because you're thrust into an innate leadership role as a quarterback just based on the nature of the position. So those things are important. But there's so many different parts of that evaluation, but you're looking for, a lot of those types of things. And I think that can be illustrated and expressed in a variety of ways based on, what those guys' elite traits are and do we have a vision for them. But, the quarterback is where everything always starts. And there's certain guys that are easier evals just because they might be doing certain things that you would ask, but that doesn't mean that they'll end up being a better player. So I think you have to be able to look at, the total group and their total body of work, and then figure out, how do they elevate others around them, and what are those elite traits, and do we feel like it translates, to our level and what we would ask, and then ultimately we would adjust to them as well.
And then finally, from me, for both of you, how much, if at all, does what 49ers did with Brock Purdy and what they got out of him influence thinking within the building in terms of being able to, if not replicate that, find someone with that and envision them being able to do what he did?
If anything, Gary, I think it shows you that it can be done. Right, that you can find players even at that position, which is, as we talked about, a tougher position to predict, right, success transitioning from college to NFL. But it just shows you that it can be done, and I do think right player, right situation. That's probably the key, right? The right scheme fits the right. It's a tough match, but I think you learn that it can be done.
Yeah. And I got tremendous respect for that. Obviously Brock did an outstanding job last year. So, a lot of respect for that. But then I think, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. If you had told me that, first year that we bring Matthew in and he's going to lead us to a Super Bowl, I think you'd take that as well. So I think it's kind of a moving target, and it shows you that there's different ways to be able to get it done. But I feel really good about our guy leading us.
Thanks very much.
Eric, and then we'll wrap up with Jordan.
Hey guys, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it. I just want to tag on to a question that Gary asked. You mentioned broader perspective in terms of evaluating this year's draft class. In terms of the offense and how they performed last year, what individual characteristics are you looking from this year's draft class to add to your offense so you can kind of be a little more dynamic around Matthew Stafford? And then the second question, you mentioned you have a longer off season with as many guys as you're adding. How important is it to kind of create more competitive environments or actions in practice so you can get a good evaluation on these guys going into training camp?
That'd be big. That'd be a big part of it. And really a big part of it too, Eric, is being able to get guys back healthy. You flip on the tape and so many guys came in and did a great job of being able to kind of fill voids, but you were missing a significant amount of guys, and the injuries are not necessarily an excuse. That's just the truth. So by the nature of getting guys back healthy, you already feel like you're in a good spot. There's different positions in this draft that will enable us to add depth. Certain players that we feel like could potentially come in to start right away, but how that thing unfolds leading into that 36 pick and then whatever, is what we feel like the best thing to do at that moment in time, we'll be able to answer that. But I think it's ultimately kind of similar to what I was saying, building the foundations. There's a lot of good things that we've done offensively. There's a lot of things when you look back on it that you say, all right, we can do at a lot higher rate. We can do a better job of establishing a foundation, being able to implement some certain things, but then overall execution, the fundamentals, the techniques, those are some of the things that I think you take for granted, is just doing the little things the right way and not getting bored with those basics, the consistent execution that's required. But any good offense that we've had here has been both efficient and explosive. And we weren't either of those last year, but I do believe that with the players that we have and the guys that we'll add, we expect to be able to do that. And I think we've got some really key core players in the right spots to just be able to be themselves. And then looking forward to seeing, some of these guys that are younger players in-house continue to take steps in the right direction. And then we'll see what it looks like with who we end up adding after this weekend.
How much did Cam Akers, the way he played at the end of the season, how much does that play into what you want to do next year?
I think it's big. I think for him, anytime that you're able to have a level of success, and I think being able to go through what he did shows a lot about the human being. He's able to have, 500, over 500 in the last 5 games, and really be able to, be a bright spot for us. And let's continue to build on that. Excited about Ron Gould and what he'll be able to do with that room. But I know Cam's had a great look in his eye, expecting to continue to build on the way that he finished. And confidence is a powerful thing that can compound in the right ways. And he certainly has taken the steps to be able to do that. And that's a big deal. And I'm really looking forward to watching him shine from start to finish this year.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Less quick position question for you. At defensive tackle, what are your evaluations of this class overall? And then how does that position go in terms of what you guys do with the versatility and the pass rush element? How does that position potentially go from being a defensive tackle to being a premium position on your roster build?
Can't tell you how we feel about the draft class, unfortunately, Jordan, but you asked a good question. But at the end of the day, versatility is important. Each of the 3 defensive linemen, especially in base, they have specific job description, and what you try to do from a draft perspective is, okay, sometimes you're going to talk about first, second down, the normal down and distances where you're going to have some mix of run and pass, right? There's a job description of the defensive lineman, and do some of the players in this year's draft, do they have those superpowers that fit those job descriptions? And then when you get to the more known passing situations, you go to 4 down linemen. Usually it's only 2 interior or interior defensive linemen versus 3. You're going to tilt a little more. Do you have something right, a little more juice to rush the passer? And sometimes you got to make subs, and sometimes you get fortunate and you can keep the same player on the field, like we've probably done with 99 for many years. But sometimes you got to do it by committee. Sometimes you get fortunate and have a player who's a little more complete than others.
And do you think that those players exist in this draft class, complete players like that at this position group?
I will tell you this is when we drafted Aaron Donald, I don't know if I could have bet that he was going to, have the Hall of Fame career that he did, but we definitely felt he was good. So I don't know if I'm going to go there, but wouldn't tell you if we felt like there was an Aaron Donald in this draft. We'd at least try to keep that to ourselves, but it would probably be pretty obvious.
Oh no, I was just saying complete players with all of those tool traits that you were just discussing, not the next Aaron Donald.
The only thing I can say is usually there's less complete players than players that have, let's call it, more specific roles in a draft. That's usually the case, and this one's no different.